Good morning, everybody. It is 7:15 now, 7:16 a.m. on Tuesday morning, I believe. Tuesday morning on draft week. We are just 2 days, 2 days away from the NFL draft. And of course, we're going to talk draft today. Of course, we are. What else would we do? What else is there to do? So I'm Brian M. Hauser. You can find me on Twitter at HawkBlogger. And I know you already are aware of Hawk Blogger Mornings. That's why you're here. It is great to see all of you join. It's great to have folks who've been joining YouTube as members. A lot of folks. We had a really fun time last night with a members only pre-draft chat. Dana was there. Nathan was there. A bunch of our members only folks were there. Patreon folks were there. So it was really nice. It was good to get together. One of the benefits of being a suite level member, and also a benefit of being either a sponsor or a Ring of Honor member over at Patreon. So fun stuff. We'll keep looking for ways to enhance people's memberships, but that was fun. Had a lot of fun discussing Dana's trip to the draft, what she does there. Talked about some of the moves that we've seen happen of late, what we think about those. So good stuff. This morning, though, I got to say, as I was putting my head down to sleep, which who knows when that happens lately, but I was scrolling through Twitter as I am often to do, and came upon an article from John Boyle. Now, John is a guy I have a ton of respect for. I think John's done great work since prior to being the Seahawks senior writer. And I think he's still done. I think he's absolutely elevated the work that's done inside the VMAC as a staff writer for the Seahawks. There is the reality, though, that when you are writing for an organization, the tendency is going to be to be very positive. The tendency is going to be to spin everything in the most positive light. You're not going to get the hard-hitting analysis. You're not going to get the tougher questions and deeper analysis. And so that's not John's fault. That's just the job. You're kind of an extension of the PR team when you're in that role. And so I have to admit, I don't always click on those articles because I don't feel like reading what can feel at times like propaganda. But I clicked on this one because it was a story about Mike Macdonald and what he said at the coaching clinic that was held at University of Washington last month. And this was a pretty, I have to admit, I thought about finding a way to sign up for this clinic because it had a pretty remarkable set of speakers. And Mike Macdonald was one of them. And so I didn't do that for a variety of reasons. And I was curious, like maybe there's a few quotes in here. Maybe I learned a little something about Mike Macdonald through John Boyle. And I was pleasantly surprised. If you guys have not read this article, it's on my timeline. I retweeted it. I think I quote tweeted it. And there's a lot in there. I'm going to go ahead and read some of it to you. But I feel like I got out of it what I was looking for, which was a bit of an insight into who Mike Macdonald is as a coach. And I won't read everything, but let me read a few things. And I think the important piece here is understanding this is a coach's clinic. He's talking to coaches, he's talking to other football guys. He is trying to impart his philosophy and approach to coaching. I think the thing that I like about that is that you are less likely to hide behind platitudes when you're in front of other coaches, other football coaches. I think you're more likely to be your true self. I think you're more likely to try to put your perspective out there and be a little bit more real, which, gives us a chance to to hear that. That's different than a press conference. So I'll read this paragraph. While answering a question about defensive fronts and pass rush in particular, Macdonald noted that for the most part, he isn't interested in moving linemen around for the sake of dressing things up. Okay, pause there. It's interesting. Like he is kind of one of those, like, you see what you get. We're gonna beat you with who we are, not with some disguise from a front perspective. At the high school level, he noted, there can be more value in doing that when there are more physical mismatches to compensate from week to week. But in the NFL, what every team has top talent, Macdonald has a different goal in mind for his defensive front. One that, if executed right, can set the tone for the entire team. Quote, "We believe in knocking the crap out of the guy in front of you, and then some." Tell me that isn't exactly what you want to hear from your new head coach of the Seahawks. And it reminds me of Pete Carroll in the sense that Pete talked about the circle of toughness. For him, a lot of it started with the running game and beating guys up there, and how that created the circle of toughness or closed the circle of toughness. I've talked about throughout this last month that my assessment of Mike Macdonald is that he values defensive line and defensive tackles differently than Pete Carroll did. And this is more evidence to that. This is a guy that, when he's talking about setting the tone for the entire team, he starts with the defensive line. And I think that's something to pay attention to coming into this draft. Another thing that was really interesting here, talking about installing the defense. Couple pieces here that got my attention. He talked about how from the offseason workouts in April through camp, so that by September, they will be ready for all the challenges that offenses present. He starts by saying, quote, "There's no perfect defense. Otherwise, everyone would run one play call on defense and everyone would be happy. There's strengths to calls and there's weaknesses. We call them stressors." Important concept to pay attention to when you hear about Mike Macdonald's defense. So when we're installing these rules to our players, day one, these next 2 weeks, which, by the way, the Seahawks because they have a new coach, they're in a mini camp right now ahead of the draft. So when we're installing these rules to our players, day one, these next 2 weeks in phase one, so he's calling this phase one, I'm not going to give them one call. All they're learning is coverages, structures, and techniques. They're learning stresses and strengths of those calls and how to execute individual techniques. By the end of phase one, we'll learn how to get lined up. Then phase two, we'll start introducing calls. And then at that point, all you're doing is just learning adjustments, and it should be easier to learn. So, one, it's very clear that they are building something up from the ground up here. They're not connecting it to past defensive approaches that they've done in Seattle. The defenders are going to be learning a new approach. And a lot of this is the back seven is going to be a key part of that. And so in this point, they're going to be looking at which coverages, but the important point here that stuck out to me is they're learning stresses and strengths of those calls. So part of what that indicates is that Mike Macdonald is helping the players understand, okay, you're going to play this technique. Here's what it makes you susceptible to. Here's what it's great at. And by giving them that kind of foundational clarity about what when they're asked to play this technique, here's what the potential stressors are, to use his language, is just really foundational learning to help them be set to adapt in real time when they're in a game. He goes on to say, imagine being a player and you get 17 things based on how an offense is lined up. There is no way I can play the way you want me to play. But if you say, hey, I'm going to do the thinking for you, and we're going to live in these 5 or 6 worlds and just know them cold, like the back of your hand, these 5 or 6 things, we're going to make it look the same, but we're going to change the looks, move guys around. And this is not about, he said he's going to keep his defensive line stable, static. This is about the back 7. So he's saying we're going to move guys around and attack offenses differently. Love the concept of attacking offenses. Doesn't feel like we've been attacking offenses on the Seahawks side, defensive side of the ball, for a long time. We're going to attack offenses differently. Well, now, shoot, those guys can play those 6 pretty good. They understand the stressors, but for the offense to find that for a 60 or 80 play game, that's going to be tough for them to do. So it's a little bit of like reading in between there. But basically what he's saying is, yes, there are weaknesses to any call that you make, but there's going to be 5 or 6 kind of approaches for each of these different coverages that the guys can be doing. They can mix and match those, and they can change the way they look, so you're not really clear on which coverage that they're in. And then you're going to have to, as an offense, find the right weakness in this manipulating, mutating defense and coverage set. And you're going to have a hard time doing that in a set of 60 or 80 plays in a game. A couple other pieces that I'll talk about here. He says at one point in the clinic, Macdonald was asked the most important traits he looks for in players. And while, yes, there are physical traits that are obviously a big factor, he didn't hesitate to point out one of the most important traits that had nothing to do with size or speed or athleticism, and it was equally important in building a coaching staff. Quote, I love guys who love football, man. We do a lot of football. It's kind of funny how football guys talk. With coaches, what I wanted to hear when we were interviewing guys was, when we turned the tape on, subquote, oh man, this was awesome. We had this one problem, but we taught about the problem in a new way. And what happened was, end of subquote. You can hear the excitement. You want that type of mentality of guys that love ball. And I thought that was something that popped with the guys we ended up hiring. I talked to you guys about this with Ryan Grubb. When they were interviewing offensive guys, I could just imagine Mike Macdonald looking through tape, hearing how these guys thought about these different situations. And Mike is showing you and talking about how intricate he approaches defense and the details and the strategy. And so I think he's uniquely adept at being able to identify offensive guys or other coaches that can do similar things. So he's building a coaching staff that are football geeky in this way and into the details and into counters, moves and counter moves. I think that's encouraging as well. Now, I think there's 2 more things I'll say, because I mean, honestly, I'm basically reading most of the article at this point, but it was really good. John Boyle again on Seahawks.com. This, Mike Macdonald comes from the Harbaugh tree. He comes from both Harbaughs. And so it was interesting. He quoted both of them. He says, this is a Jim Harbaughism. You get good at football by playing football. So we're going to get reps. We're going to maximize the time and be efficient. I mean, I'm not a big Jim Harbaugh guy, whatever. But then later, Macdonald added, this is a John Harbaughism. Guys are allowed to get better. It's amazing how different those two brothers are. You do that by getting direct reps and coaching them up in the right way and positive reinforcement. And if guys don't love football, then you're not going to be out there. I believe in our ability to develop players, and it's fun to work with guys who love it. So interesting, the positive reinforcement, guys are allowed to get better. You know, he has that growth mindset. Last thing I think this is the last thing I'm going to reference. Yes, for now, last thing I'll reference here. He says a coach's scheme is important. This is John Boyle, as is the talent on the field. But for Macdonald, another key to playing winning football is, quote, shocking effort. It should pop off the screen like, holy crap, how do they play like that? Then it all starts from there. Boyle says, saying you want shocking of effort, of course, is one thing, while getting it out of teams is another. Quote from Mike Macdonald. So how do you get that? How do you get shocking effort? Well, first, you got to be in great shape. You got to have guys who love each other and want to play for one another. You can't be selfish. What you're asking them to do is be incredibly clear. And in order to do that, you have to build confidence. And when you build confidence, guess what happens? They communicate because they know what the hell they're doing. We're talking pre-snap alerts, post-snap alerts. We're communicating. Everybody knows exactly what they're doing. We're flying around, we're leveraging the ball. Then and then it starts to look like shocking effort, but it doesn't happen overnight. I thought that was really cool that he's really clear about how he wants it to look when they're playing defense. He wants just guys flying around, and he's clear that part of the way he does that is similar in some ways to what Pete Carroll used to talk about in his simplification of defense, which is guys can play their best when they're not thinking about what they're supposed to do. And the other part that was interesting there is he recognizes he's got a high enough EQ. We've talked a lot about Mike Macdonald's IQ, but he's got a high enough EQ to understand you can be really clear on what you're supposed to do, but if you don't like and or trust the guy next to you, then maybe this isn't something that's going to work out. Maybe you're not going to give, quote, shocking effort. But we saw that with the Legion of Boom. LOB, eventually Cam Chancellor redefined it as love our brothers. And the bond between those guys was something that propelled them throughout that era. And so I think this is something that some of the tough guy coaches don't appreciate and don't cultivate. And I think it's a good thing that Mike Macdonald understands this. Whether he's able to do it as a head coach versus as a coordinator is something left to be seen. But I thought that was pretty cool. And I really felt like it was reassuring to me just to read again how much he is steeped in toughness, beat up the opponent, and high effort with what can be a somewhat complicated defense, a little bit more coverage mixing, a little bit more disguising than I think the Seahawks have been known for over the past 14 years. So cool article from John Boyle. Couple other things at the top here before I get into my favorite players in this draft. You haven't seen Devin Witherspoon is going to be joining Daniel Jeremiah and Tom Pelissero at 5:00 today. Now, they say 5:00. I don't know if that's 5:00 Eastern time or not. My guess is it is. Well, who knows? But Devin Witherspoon will be on today. You can see that on Twitter under the NFL account. So Devin Witherspoon will be on. Could be some interesting things we learned there. A few other notes that kind of jumped out at me since we last spoke. Some stuff from the 49ers land. John Lynch had a few interesting quotes. So there are a few things that came out. One, let's just talk Brandon Ayuk. John Lynch basically said, we want Brandon Ayuk to be here. He doesn't anticipate him being traded. Not that that's the strongest commitment one way or another. He did stop short, though, when asked by a reporter, have you given Brandon Ayuk and his agent permission to find a trade partner? He did not comment on that. That he could have said no. I mean, it could have been an easy flat no. The fact that he didn't say no opens a door for sure. And for people that don't remember, this was a key part of what they did with DeForest Buckner. They gave him and his agent permission to seek a trade, and he was eventually traded. I have a similar read on this situation as I think Grant Cohn does, which is I believe the 49ers have probably some form of an agreement in place with Jacksonville at 17. And depending on who's available, they'll either pull the trigger or they won't. And in my current mock draft, I have them making that trade and drafting Brian Thomas. I actually don't think that's who they'll draft. I think the players that they will be looking for with that pick will be offensive tackles. I think they have an eye on Trent Williams' age and his retirement. I think they know that they need help there. And I wouldn't be surprised if they go up there and they get an Amarius Mims. Who knows if J.C. Latham falls, maybe Troy Fautanu falls. Who knows? But I would not be shocked if the 49ers trade Brandon Ayuk for the 17th pick in the draft and end up with an offensive lineman. And yes, I see from Corey in chats that some folks are saying they get the 5th pick. There was some complicated scenario where they move multiple picks back and forth and blah, blah, blah. I don't think the 49ers are getting in the top 10 of this draft. I don't believe that. I don't believe it. So I do think it makes a lot of sense. If I'm Jacksonville, do I want to get one of the guys who's not a top 3 in this, not the elite receivers in this class, and hope, even if I do get one of the elite receivers, I'm going to have to develop them and hope that they are great from the day one? Or do I want to add one of the best receivers in the NFL right now, give them a big contract and call it a day? I think if I'm Jacksonville, that's a much better use of that first round pick in their situation than drafting a young guy, especially like a Brian Thomas, which is who everyone has going to them. He's a bit more of a projection. And I mean, not that he's a huge crazy reach, but it's just, he is not Malik Neighbors. He is not Marvin Harrison Jr. He's not Rome Odunze. So I could see that happening. Another thing that came out in that John Lynch press conference, couple things. He talked about them having 22 first-round grades on players. And people are saying that's a small number. That's actually a really large number. I think anything more than 20 players with first-round grades is more than normal. The average for any NFL team in an average draft year is about 20 players with first-round grades, usually between 15 and 20. So 22 is quite a bit. But he went on to talk about that there were 83 players that the 49ers had draft grades on from the fall who chose to return to school. This is NIL related, right? These are guys that they had draftable grades on who chose instead to go back to college. And he's heard from others around the league. Well, no, I think this might be Nick Wagner who's reporting this, but with NIL and the extra pandemic year that happened, next year's draft could just have a treasure trove of players. So when people talk about trading picks from next year's draft to move up into this year's draft, that's a questionable strategy. Next year's draft could be one, like people are talking about it getting back to the normal numbers that you normally have, and that could just be a very bountiful draft. So I know we've focused on that the quarterbacks are not the same level next year as they are this year, but that doesn't mean the draft overall will be lesser than this year. So that was another thing that stood out. And then one more minor thing, I guess I will say, is the Michael Penix stuff. Michael Penix had his Players Tribune article came out. It was really well written, great stuff, great close. And then you had Diana Rossini quote tweeting Chase Daniel. And if you haven't seen Chase Daniel's evaluation of Michael Penix, it's worth a watch. It is a little bit, I mean, as a huge Michael Penix guy, I will say Chase Daniel chose the Texas game as his game to break down, and it was an unreal performance by Michael Penix. So, of course, you're going to have some positive things to say. But Diana Rossini quote tweeted at Chase Daniel. Chase Daniel had said, "The more I watch Michael Penix, the more I think he will absolutely be a first-round QB." Diana Rossini said, "He," meaning Michael Penix, "is the name GMs have told me is the best kept secret in the draft." What in the world are you talking about? How can people talk about Michael Penix, the runner-up to the Heisman Trophy, who's thrown for over 4,500 yards in back-to-back years? How can he be the best kept secret? I mean, it's really, his story in general is one of the most bizarre. This is why the draft is so fun, because you got guys that see someone rated as top 10 and other guys see them as third round picks. And you've got guys that seem as clear as day to someone, especially this happens, I think, with West Coast and definitely Northwest prospects, where East Coast and Southeast, they're asleep. They're not paying attention to football out here. They don't watch them a lot. And so then it's new news to them. They're like, hey, actually, this guy's pretty good. And so I just always find that a little fascinating. And I think it's also fair that it goes the other direction too. We get a lot of exposure to these West Coast Pac-12 kind of schools. How have those Pac-12 schools done when they've played against the SEC? Not well. So, there is some aspect of, yeah, it's safe to ignore some of those teams because they're just not playing the same level of football, the same level of big boy football that gets played in other parts of the country. So I'm really, Michael Penix's story is going to be one we're going to certainly watch, and one that increasingly looks like he will be a first round pick. But it's as clear as day to me that Michael Penix is significantly better of a prospect than Bo Nix. He's younger, believe it or not, better arm, as good or better leader. I think a better processor, like a lot of things. So in any event, we will see this all unfold in a couple days. And Penix is one of the most polarizing players in this draft. You got guys in chat here who I know are super down on Penix. It's fine. We will the benefit here is we will get to see. We will get to see not just where he gets drafted, but how he plays. I will say this. It would not shock me if Michael Penix ends up going much higher than people think. I will not be shocked if his name gets called much higher than people think. We will see. We will see. I can't wait. So, one of the things I teased, the main thing I teased for this show this morning is who are my guys? This is kind of a common draft show to do for guys that spend way too much time obsessing about players in the draft. And folks that have been watching probably know a number of these names. Some of them you might not, because I haven't talked about them as much. And these are guys I'm not going to get into as much as, I mean, we've been talking a lot about when sequentially the Seahawks should take one position or one player versus another. What value they have. Should they be a first rounder, mid 20s, in the teens? Should they go in the high part of the second round or the later? That isn't what this is about. This is about whether it's rational or irrational. These are just guys that I like. I like these players. I could probably get my head around them being called at almost any spot in the draft. If they get called for the Seahawks, I'll be happy that they're a Seahawk. And like I said, some of these names are going to be pretty familiar. Some of them may be less familiar, but these are the guys. Above all else, these are the guys. And I'm going to start with a guy that I don't think I've mentioned his name once. I'm going to start with a guy that I haven't mentioned his name once. And he's a guy that potentially could go undrafted. I think that more likely he's somewhere between the 5th and 7th rounds. But he's an offensive tackle who I think could be a promising, interesting guard project. And he's got something. I'll admit this, guys. Sometimes I just like a name. I like a name. And I think there's something magic about, there's no way that name is not going to be an NFL player. This guy is Delmar Glaze. Delmar Glaze out of Maryland. He's kind of a swing tackle. He's 325 pounds, somewhere between 315 and 325. Big dude. And something about him, one, I just love the name. Two, I love that he is a bigger dude that has been a very good pass protector at a tackle position, but has struggled a little bit in run blocking. And I think his body type really profiles inside at guard. And even if he does stay at a tackle, he's a bigger tackle. So I think that there's something to work with there. And if you get Scott Huff a chance to mold him, there could be something there. So yeah, Delmar Glaze, had to throw one out at you, was someone who's on my list. I will give you another guy that I have not talked about as often. I will get to some of the guys that you know. You'll know the names. Luke McCaffrey. Luke McCaffrey is a guy that feels slept on is too strong. But let's go through the McCaffreys that have played in the NFL. You've got Ed McCaffrey. Ed McCaffrey mainly played for the Denver Broncos, was an all-pro level receiver, Pro Bowl level receiver, incredibly productive. And then you've got Christian McCaffrey, who we know very well. And I look at that bloodline. And by the way, another tell from John Lynch is that he says he believes in bloodlines, that he really believes in those. That means guys like Luke McCaffrey. That means like Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son. Some of these guys, Chris Jenkins, those are guys to watch out for the 49ers. And I don't think he's wrong, but the McCaffreys in general, I mean, you're pretty much batting 1,000 with those guys being excellent NFL players. And I looked at Luke McCaffrey and I just wonder. He in some cases is projected as a 5th round, 6th round pick. Some people have him as high as like even the 2nd or 3rd round. But if the Seahawks got Luke McCaffrey, I would not only like that because I think he has interesting upside and would be a player they could probably draft at a point where he can be a developmental player and then step forward a little bit more next year. But I think it would piss off 49ers fans. So double bonus. So Delmar Glaze, Luke McCaffrey are two of my names. Another name I haven't mentioned as often, but I'd be thrilled. And this is not getting into whether it's the biggest need for the Seahawks, but I just like this player. I think he's going to be a very good player. I'd be happy to have him. Roger Rosengarten, right tackle for the Huskies. Pro Football Focus has a bizarrely negative grade, and this is really Trevor Sikkema's grade on him. I think Roger Rosengarten has a chance to be one of those guys that when they redraft in future years, they're like, yeah, why wasn't he a 1st round pick? There are some mocks that have him. Mel Kiper's had him going to the 49ers at 31 in multiple of his mock drafts. So it's possible he will go in the 1st round. I think he's really good. I think he's prototypical pretty much at that position. And I wouldn't say I like him better than Abe Lucas, but I think that he's just a guy that I think is going to be a really high quality NFL player. So if the Seahawks decide, hey, he's high on my board and he's available and they call him, even if it's not the biggest need, I'd be happy to add Roger Rosengarten. Another name. This one should come as no surprise. T'Vondre Sweat. Probably my guy of guys. This is absolutely the number one guy on my board that if he gets his name called by another team, I am going to have visceral physical pain and discomfort. I will be upset. And if they do call him out, I may embarrass myself more than I normally do on the live draft show. So I understand all the downsides there. People can focus on them. It's fine. What did we just hear about from Mike Macdonald and what types of teams he wants to build where he just beats the crap? T'Vondre Sweat helps you do that today, now. Even if he does it for 30% of your plays because he's out of shape. When he's on the field, he will beat your ass. We don't have many guys I could say that about on the Seahawks. So T'Vondre Sweat is certainly a guy that is on my list, arguably the top of the list. Tavondre Sweat, there's a question from Hawks fan Matt Man. Was Sweat a 30 visit with the Seahawks? He was. He was. There was a incorrect report by a reporter who unfortunately often does incorrect reporting that Byron Murphy also made a 30 visit, but he did not. And that reporter later retracted that. Be careful who you pay attention to and who you trust on the reporting side, folks. Brady Henderson is the guy I trust, and he will be on the show tomorrow. Michael Sean Dugar is another guy I trust. Outside of that, I would be highly skeptical of almost anything you see, even from the beat reporters. Double check it, triple check it. Another name. So we've gone Delmar Glaze, Luke McCaffrey, Roger Rosengarten, and Tavondre Sweat. Another name for me. Sorry, I'm marking off the guys I've already talked about. Michael Hall Jr. This is the first person I think someone in chat guessed. So you are correct in that guess. Michael Hall Jr. I think it is wild that you have a guy that has gone up to 299 and ran a 4.87. Or is that maybe it was a 4.78? He has just unreal athletic profile and has shown really quick twitch first step. Well, they got him at 4.75. 4.7540 at 299. That's insane. That's a 99th percentile 40-yard dash. So I think this guy is 20 years old. I don't think. He is 20 years old. He's demonstrated the ability to put on weight, and his frame holds the weight. Unlike Johnny Newton, who is a good player, but he's definitely not one of my guys. Michael Hall Jr. can hold that weight, and I think it translates to strength in a different way. And I think his upside is incredibly promising. I think it's going to be hard to get him. I think it's going to be hard to get him in the late second round. I think he'll be an early second round pick. For me, I don't think it's crazy at all to spend a late first round pick on Michael Hall. That's how good I think he is. So I will be ecstatic if they get Michael Hall. He is kind of Kirkland brand Byron Murphy. And maybe a little bit, maybe that's selling him even a little bit short. I think he has the upside to be the best 3 tech in this draft when it's all said and done. But he'd have to go a long way to get there. He's definitely not as consistent. I mentioned Byron Murphy. He is one of my guys. So you can mark that off on your list. Yes, on your Hawk Blogger bingo sheet. Byron Murphy has been named. You can go back to the very first Real Hawk Talk in this offseason, really like just as the season was ending, when we started talking draft, and listen to who my first name was. This is not when everybody else was talking about him. I talked about Byron Murphy. Everyone on the show with me was like, really? And I'm like, yep. And this guy has got the build, the twitch, the first step, the strength. And as much as I liked him already, he really stood out to me in the game against the Huskies, where my guy that I mentioned, Tavondre Sweat, was standing on the sideline a lot, sucking air, just tapping out of the game, either because he's out of shape or because his motivation wasn't high enough. I see it. I know that that's an issue, but I still feel the way I feel. In any event, Byron Murphy was in there going up against the best offensive line in college football that's going to have potentially multiple first-round picks, and he was creating havoc almost every snap. And the way he moves and the type of disruption he caused from the inside is just not typical. So for me, it was pretty clear from the get-go that he was a special prospect, and that is why he was the first name that came up for me. I mean, I've been very, very, very consistent about my top two guys defensively from the beginning have been Byron Murphy and Jared Verse. I've been unwavering in that. And there's nothing that's changed that perspective for me. Jared Verse, another one of my guys. Mark him off. Jared Verse, if you saw the show yesterday, thank you to Jeff Simmons for sending me Albert Breer's article. I got a treat because part of what I like about Jared Verse is he plays a physical style from the edge that is not as common, and he is a bully. He's a bully on the edge. He's a guy that bull rushes as well as any player I've seen in a little while come off that edge. And I think his speed to power, which you hear a lot about in scouting and other NFL evals, his speed to power is the best in this draft, as far as I'm concerned. By the way, T'Vondre Sweat is one of the other guys. Speaking of power, if you remember right, the physics major that tweeted out who created the most force in their 40-yard dash based off their weight and their speed, T'Vondre Sweat, over 1,000 pounds of force he generated by how quickly he moved that 366 pounds on his frame. He's a powerful dude. Anyway, getting back to Verse. Verse is a guy that he plays with a edge. And I don't mean on the edge. He plays with an edge. He attacks the offensive lineman. He tries to, you talk about pancakes for offensive linemen. He pancakes. He is the one pancaking the offensive lineman. I've seen it happen multiple times. He plays the run well. He plays the pass well. He plays with high effort. He plays with physicality. And I said, the guy whose style he reminds me of is Terrell Suggs. And I said that a few weeks ago. And then Albert Breer wrote yesterday in his article that other people were starting to say he plays with Terrell Suggs' style. I'm not saying they copied me at all. That's not the implication, but it was a little validating. That's how I see him. I see him as a guy that's just going to, Terrell Suggs was not a guy that was going to bend around you with some magic move. He was just going to beat the crap out of you on the edge. And he also had some quickness, and, he wasn't just a one-trick pony, but that's who I think Jared Verse can be. So he definitely was on my list of guys from the get-go, and currently is who I have the Seahawks drafting in my latest mock. Another guy, not someone that you've probably heard me talk about as much. Malik Washington. Let me see if I can pull up some video of Malik Washington. Let's do it. So I'm going to share my screen here.
Washington breaks free into JMU territory. Washington in that reception streak in motion. Calandria looks his way. Washington breaks free into JMU territory. Malik Washington makes a man miss. How about a touchdown for you? Washington in that reception streak.
Malik Washington's a guy. This is a guy that is, I think, remarkable. Here's a little bit of a breakdown from Doug Farrar. I think this guy has got a little bit of Zay Flowers to him. I think he's got after the catch capability. I look at him plowing through defenders. He invites, like, he doesn't invite contact, but he's certainly not afraid of it. I think he's also, unlike Malachi Corley, who I really like, Yak King, Malachi Corley. Corley's largely been used as a screen guy. Here's another interesting thing on Malik Washington from PFF. Power 5 wide receivers to record 110 plus receptions and 14 plus receiving yards in a season. Since 2014, there's been 4 players to do it: Amari Cooper, Justin Jefferson, Devonta Smith, and Malik Washington. This is a guy, I mean, I just find interesting. And, you're talking about a 4.47 40. Let's watch another Malik Washington play here. A little fun. Look at that route. He just loses the guy. I just think he's a guy I would love to see the Seahawks get. So he's another of my guys high on my list. I could put Malachi Corley on here as well, but I chose to limit it somewhat. Another player that I would put on this list is Jaden Hicks, safety out of Washington. And why don't we go ahead and share a little bit of Jaden Hicks in action. Here's a nice, I will show you this as well. Here's Michael Penix throwing an interception. Don't say I never share. Hicks makes a nice play there. Hicks is a guy that most people think of as a hitter. And
I love coaching guys that want to play in the NFL.
And if you look at a lot of Jaden Hicks highlights, which I want to find another one here if I can real quick. This is the smallest screen. He's a hitter. It's a little bit better.
He had a 37.
Small screen, probably hard for you guys to see.
Incomplete, big hit by who else? Jaden
Hicks. Jaden Hicks brings the wood in the middle of the field. See if we can find one here. Maybe this is a better. Yeah, this is a great look at Jaden Hicks. Look at him coming up and supporting against the run.
3rd and 7.
Playing in the flat and then coming up and supporting it. That's not the best tackle. His first one, though, look at him come up from the deep and just lay in the wood. I'm a fan of Hicks. I think he would be a good fit for the Seahawks. Realistically, I think you're talking about he's probably a 2nd round pick, but it's not crazy to think he could fall to the 4th. I see a question around Malik Washington. I think Malik Washington, he's in the mix anywhere from the 3rd to the 5th, most likely, is where you're looking at a Malik Washington kind of guy. So if you're just joining, so far my guys are Delmar Glaze, offensive guard, tackle. Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver. Jaden Hicks, safety. Roger Rosengarten, right tackle. Malik Washington, receiver. Jared Verse, edge. Byron Murphy, defensive tackle. Michael Hall Jr., defensive tackle. And Tavondre Sweat, nose tackle. Those are the guys so far. Other guys, Javon Bullard. I love Javon Bullard. And if you don't think we're going to look at Javon Bullard highlights, then you're just wrong. I mean, this guy, I got to find my favorite tape of him. He's just a playmaker. I've got to look for this. So give me a second. I had a few. Let's see. That's not a good one. This is kind of fun. All right. We'll show you this one. Watch Javon Bullard here. So,
looking that way, retreating, and he'll just throw it out of the back of the end zone. There was.
Look at Bullard just making sure.
Comes out. I thought it was going to be way beyond the end line.
It was almost a touchdown. I mean, I feel bad the guy's hurt, but this is against DJ Stroud, and just you can't see it in the back. But Bullard just comes in and knocks the living crap. This is a small guy, but gosh, dude, he brings the wood. So, like, I have, I think, a highlight on my, yeah, here we go. Here's Javon Bullard here playing nickel, and look at him break on the ball. Look at that break. And then here, look at him come up and support against the run, and just, he's a physical dude. We need players like that. Look at him laying the wood. You tell me that you don't want that. Look at him adjusting, making the pick here. He does everything you want a secondary player to do. Look, again, back to this play. Look at that break on the ball, the read, the hands, the athleticism. I just love the style of play here this guy does. He does everything I want. Let's watch him knock this guy's. I mean, come on. Javon Bullard is definitely one of my guys. I think Javon Bullard probably goes in the 3rd round. Could go as high as the 2nd. But I definitely, I will be thrilled if we hear Javon Bullard as a Seahawk. Really, really like his style of play. He's got a little Earl Thomas to him. I'm not saying he's Earl Thomas, but that kind of just decisive, reckless abandon that I just, I miss. I miss that in the secondary. All right. I've got a few more guys. How many more guys? I've got a few more. So let's go through them. I'll try to go a little bit faster because obviously these are my guys. So I'm just gonna obsess about them. But Graham Barton, we've talked about, and I think that we don't have to go into great detail here because we've talked about him. But I do want to see if I can find. There's a video. There's a video of Graham Barton just running his shuttle. And I want to see if I can find that. Give me a sec, guys. Because I just, when you watch him move, he moves differently than the other guard prospects in this draft. This was at his pro day, so let me just look for that. Yeah, here we go. He's a little bit more of the kind of rocked up guy you're going to see. Different than a Cooper Beebe. So this is him running his 40. Fast dude. Let me see if I can find. Where's him running the shuttle? That is the thing. I want this right here. This is a more correlated thing with guard play in the NFL. That's a guy that just moves. He moves the way I want a guard to move, and he is strong. And so I love the idea of him getting out there, helping set the edge on an outside zone toss sweep to K9. Get K9 on the edge running behind a guy that can move like that, blocking 20 yards downfield. Yeah, Graham Barton's one of my guys. Troy Fautanu, one of my guys. So my 3 originals, and this is all the video's there. You can't lie about it. My 3 originals were Byron Murphy, Jared Verse, and Troy Fautanu. Those are my 3 originals. You can believe it. You cannot believe it, but it's the reality. You can go back and find Real Hawk Talk, and this was probably back in December, maybe January. I won't go deep on Fautanu. He's been talked about a ton. There's everything to like about him. He gives the team exactly what they need. Love him. So absolutely big fan, and would love to have him on the team. I could put Talisi Fuaga on my list. I didn't, just because it started getting really long, but I love him too. Next, a guy I've talked about a lot. I probably mocked him to the Seahawks in almost every one of my mocks because I'm hoping he lasts till later rounds. Tip Ryman. Tip Ryman is, I think, one of the most interesting prospects in this draft. He has not been that productive as a college player. You know, he's largely been kind of just a big dude, blocked a little bit, caught a little bit, but he's pretty raw. And then he went to the combine, and at like 270 pounds, just absolutely blew up. And so I'll give you a little bit of video of him. We'll see how this goes, just so you can see him in action. I'm sure I'm going to get some copyright complaints here, but let's go back here. There's Tip Ryman.
Reggie Love in the backfield,
And this is him catching. So you can see him move. He's just an easy mover. That's an NFL tight end movement. And then you get him at 270, and he is strong as an ox. And so I just see this as a guy that can be, I mean, he's not going to be Jason Witten, but I absolutely think that he is an ideal 3rd tight end for the Seahawks, a guy that can grow into potentially being a number 2, maybe a number 1 tight end, and hopefully be available in the later rounds. So definitely, he is way up on my list of my guys. Next, I have Mike Sainristil. This is a guy who I think is very unlikely to be a Seahawk, but I would love. I think last year for me, Brian Branch was this kind of guy. This year it's Mike Sainristil. I think Sainristil is an almost can't miss prospect. He is going to be an NFL player that whatever team he plays for, their fan base is going to love him. He's going to make plays. He is going to be a leader. He is going to be physical. He's going to be around the ball. He is going to be a great part of some defense. Unfortunately, right now, I have him going to the 49ers in the 1st round. Nobody else is going to make that pick, but I mean, I think he is going to be a 1st round level impact player. He likely will go in the 2nd. Some people have him even in the 3rd. He is really his biggest downside, unlike Javon Bullard, who I think can play safety, nickel corner. He's like a little bit more of a movable piece. Sainristil is pretty much a slot corner. Like, that's what he is. So I think he's a little bit more limited in how you can use him, but dude, he's a weapon. It wouldn't be a list of my guys if I didn't have Michael Penix Jr. on there. I've been on Michael Penix Jr. the last 2 years at least. I've been confused the whole time about why people had him as a third round grade. I've been laughed at, uh, trolled on Twitter constantly about it over those 2 years, less so more recently, but still, I think this guy has everything going for him, and I really wish the best for him. I don't think he's gonna be a Seahawk, but we will see. So Michael Penix Jr. Couple more guys. I got 4 more guys on my list. Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall is a guy that I don't think I've talked about that much. And if you haven't seen the catch, let me show you the catch. Let me show you the catch. All right. So this is this is the catch. I mean, that is an insane that's an insane play. And I just think like this is a guy that I think people are sleeping on is too strong, but I think he has clear number 2 receiver upside and possibly more. So I love Ricky Pearsall. I think it's possible he could be last until the 3rd round. I think that's pretty unlikely, but this is a 99th percentile athlete at receiver, 6'1", 190 pounds. He actually benched 225, 17 reps, which is in the 84th percentile, so he's strong. He's got elite speed, 4.41 speed, elite agility, 98th percentile 3-cone. He's got elite explosion, 42-inch vertical, which we just saw. 95th percentile broad jump. I mean, he's got a lot going for him. So in some ways, I'm not totally sure. I mean, he's got some drop problems. I'm not totally sure why he isn't more of a conversation in the 1st round. I mean, he's got a lot going for him. All right. Another guy, Malik Mustafa. Certainly a guy on my list. This is a guy that, again, will bring toughness. He's a little bit lower on my list of guys because I think he's got more clear limitations to his game. But I will be excited. If the Seahawks pick him, it means they know how they want to use him. And I would love to have a physical tone setter like Malik Mustafa on the Seahawks. All right. Last 2 guys. One, you've heard me talk about a little bit, Mason McCormick, offensive guard. I think one of the most intriguing prospects from a developmental perspective at the guard position, and someone that you could get in the 4th round, possibly. I don't know how the guards are going to fall in this draft. There's some places that have a lot of these guards just gobbled up in the first 3 rounds. I think you're going to be able to find one of these guys in the 4th round, and I'm hoping Mason McCormick would be a guy that I'd be interested. I'd rather draft Mason McCormick in the 4th round than Cooper Beebe in the 2nd. And of course, this is meaning we'd get a 2nd round pick somehow. I think Mason McCormick has more interesting physical traits that I'd be interested in seeing them develop, given Scott Huff as coach. And he also just plays with the edge that I like in offensive linemen. So I don't think he's a year 1 starter, but maybe he doesn't have to be. So that is Mason McCormick. Last guy on my list is Anthony Gould, or Gould, however it's pronounced. Small dude. He's 5'8", 174. So he is like a mighty might. All right. But as far as someone who I think has some just intriguing ability as a receiver, as a returner, I think this is a guy to watch. I'm going to see if I can find a good video of him. And I think he has not been playing with a great quarterback, which makes him a little bit harder to evaluate. I think his size is going to make him someone that people are going to want to keep later. Here's a decent view of him. Let me show you this real quick. So good little bubble screen, and he's just shifty, but he's also a returner. So he is not scared of contact. And I think he's a good route runner. I think he's got good hands. So I think Anthony Gould, this is a guy you could potentially get in the 7th round. He had apparently a really strong pro day. I think this is a guy that fans would be very happy. I think he could fit into the return game with the new kickoff rules. So that's the last of my list of guys. I could have kept going because I certainly have a lot of guys in this draft that I like. I also could have listed guys that are not my guys. I think you guys know some of those players. But here's a recap of who were my guys. I had Javon Bullard, safety. Tavondre Sweat, nose tackle. Michael Hall Jr., defensive tackle. Byron Murphy, defensive tackle. Jared Verse, edge. Graham Barton, guard. Could be a center. Troy Fautanu, tackle, guard. Tip Ryman, tight end. Mike Sainristil, nickelback. Michael Penix Jr., quarterback. Malik Mustafa, safety. Ricky Pearsall, receiver. Malik Washington, receiver. Roger Rosengarten, right tackle. Jaden Hicks, safety. Mason McCormick, guard. Luke McCaffrey and Anthony Gould, wide receivers. And Delmar Glaze, offensive tackle, offensive guard. Tell me in chat which of those guys you like the best. Which of those guys you're just not with. They're not your guys and you're not a fan. I'd love to hear that. And if you have guys that are your guys, always happy to hear that as well. And I will, Hawks fan Mattman shared in chat that he saw an Albert Breer report that there's some concerns that Fautanu's knee issue possibly affecting his potential longevity. Makes me a bit nervous when thinking about Luka's situation. Yeah. I mean, who knows? I think in general, if anybody's going to know his situation, it's going to be the Seahawks with Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff. They were in there. They know the situation. And if the Seahawks draft him, I'm not going to be worried about it. And I also think there's some things that happen around this time of the draft where certain teams might try to use certain reporters to get information out there, to have guys drop down the draft board so they have a chance at them. So I'm always skeptical. And, I'll trust that the Seahawks will do the evaluation and will have more information than pretty much any other team on any Husky that they would draft. Are there any guys that you thought would be on my list that weren't, that you were waiting on, that I didn't name? Curious if there's anyone that fits that description for you. I'll tell you, one of the guys, like I said, Malachi Corley was pretty close to being on this list. Junior Colson was pretty close to being on this list. A few other guys were close to being on my list. But I got to say, the guys that get me the most excited, Javon Bullard, Tavondre Sweat, Michael Hall Jr. Those are probably the guys that get me the most excited. Now, that's partially like Byron Murphy and Jared Verse and all those other guys. I've talked about them so long. And obviously, I'll be very, very excited. But there's something about some of these other guys that not as many people are on that kind of give them a little sparkle for me. You thought Cooper DeJean was going to be on my list. No. I mean, I like Cooper DeJean. He's not one of my guys, but I don't have the problem that other people do. And maybe that's why I stand out about him. The Green Lab says, surprised you didn't say Theo Johnson. Yeah, I like Tip Ryman better than Theo Johnson. Theo Johnson has all the measurables. There's something about Tip Ryman. He's just this country strong dude who I think has the right mentality to be an inline blocker and a potential receiver. He gives me Will Dissly vibes. And I just think he's a really slept on athlete. So Theo Johnson, definitely, I wouldn't hate Theo Johnson. Part of the reason he's not one of my guys, and I'll admit this, is I think he's going to go in the 3rd round. And I don't want the Seahawks draft. I will not. Part of my bar for my guys list is, will I be happy kind of wherever they draft one of these guys? And I mean, there's a lot of these guys that if they named him in the 1st round, I would not be thrilled, but I would be happy that they were Seahawks. Obviously I don't want them drafting Delmar Glaze in the 1st round, but I just, within reason. And so Theo Johnson, within reason, he could go as high as the 2nd, but I think reasonably 3rd is probably his ceiling. I wouldn't be happy if they spent a 3rd round pick. I wouldn't be happy if they spent a 4th round pick on Theo Johnson. It's not really his fault. I just don't, I don't want them spending that early of a pick on a tight end. Who else? Hawks fan Mattman thought Marshawn Nealand. Yeah, I've certainly been talking up Marshawn Nealand. Austin Booker was actually closer to making this list than Marshawn Nealand. I think Austin Booker is my type of guy who's just raw, did not get a lot of snaps, only played like 500 snaps last year, but has some remarkable flash. His talent seems to be really on the rise, and he seems like a guy that, given an NFL calendar where he can be bulking up, working with nutritionists to get put on a little weight, and then working with coaches, he could be a guy that ends up making some team really happy. Marshawn Nealand is more already a NFL athlete who just played at a smaller school. And so level of competition has been his question mark. He's not as much of a sleeper anymore. I think Austin Booker to me still is, and as a guy I'm pretty interested in. Someone asked, no linebackers. No linebackers. Yeah, I don't love these linebackers. Junior Colson was on the list, then off the list. I really like Junior Colson. Here's the thing. I think Junior Colson legitimately is a 3rd round player. I think he is almost certainly going to get drafted ahead of that, it sounds like now. And so I'm just uncomfortable with the level of value that people are assigning to him. And I think that because the off-ball linebacker class is so thin and so meek, there is not top-level talent in this group. There's going to be teams like the Eagles or the Seahawks or whoever who are going to reach for a linebacker, an off-ball linebacker. And I think taking Junior Colson in the 2nd would be potentially a mistake. Michael Barrett is someone who's closer to me as someone that was almost on my list because I think he could be gotten in the later rounds, and I'd be very excited to add him. There's another Marish Lufau is another guy that was almost on my list. I think he's going to be drafted later, and I'd be happy about, but I don't know. None of them are just clean enough for me to be super excited about them. So yeah, no linebackers on my list. Matt asks, were there any QBs would any QBs excite you other than Penix? Well, I mean, within reason, I mean, I think there's some chance that Drake May starts sliding down the board, but I don't think the Seahawks go up and get him. I think he's certainly an interesting player. Jaden Daniels, I like, but I really wonder about his longevity. No, people aren't talking about that enough, but that guy does not. He's the anti-Russell Wilson. He's taken some really big hits, and he does not have the frame to handle that kind of pounding in the NFL. So I'm not as high on Jaden Daniels for that reason. Other quarterbacks, I mean, I like Jordan Travis. I've mentioned his name a lot, but that's like a 6-round flyer. I'm not as big on the other quarterbacks. I know everyone's into Spencer Rattler. The person matters to me a lot, especially at quarterback where you're expected to be a leader, and reports aren't good there with Rattler. So I don't know if I really want to cheer for a guy that is not necessarily a great leader in that locker room. And so that for Rattler, for me, that has nothing to do with his talent as a passer. He might very well be a very good passer, but so is Jeff George, and actually was a Seahawk, if you don't remember. But I want guys that people follow in that quarterback position, and I'm just not sure Spencer Rattler is that guy. I think, folks, with that, I am going to wrap up. We've gone through the list. Tomorrow on the show, we are going to have Brady Henderson at 8 a.m. There's a chance I might go live earlier, so keep an eye. This is the reason you should click like and subscribe. And I might go on a little early and then have Brady come on a little bit late. But Brady will be on at 8 a.m. So we will be talking about his opinion about what's going on and anything that he's hearing that gives him some insight. And then tomorrow night, we will do another show, a real Hawk Talk show that will come on with, I think Jeff Simmons will be there and possibly Nathan Ernst. We'll see. And then Thursday is the day. Thursday's the day, the day of the draft, and I will be live throughout the first round. And I will have Evan Hill on with me for some of the time. And I'll pull on some other people other times, but it's going to be probably a lot of me. So we'll take some questions. We'll do some fun stuff on air. If you haven't, now is the time to fill out your 2024 draft prediction. And the way to do that is you've got to be either a club level or a suite level YouTube member, and you can get access to the spreadsheet to do it, or a Patreon supporter, patreon.com/hawkblogger. Any patron can do it. The link is over there on patreon.com/hawkblogger. Fill it out. Play along with us. I'm also entering in the mock drafts of some of the more famous draft analysts out there, so you can compare your scores to theirs. And Rick R asks, what time are you going to lock out the draft prediction on Thursday? I'm going to try to lock it out right when the draft starts. It'll probably be one of the first things I do. So you're going to have time all the way up to the draft to mess with your predictions, and then I'm going to lock it. So now's the time. If you haven't already, start thinking through it. Make sure you duplicate and rename the sheet in the spreadsheet that says, like the tab that says duplicate and rename. Make sure you follow all the instructions. The instructions are there for a reason. And make sure you add yourself to the scoring part of the sheet, or you will not get your score taken care of or added up. And make sure you check the spelling tab of players, because it is an exact match type of game. So I've gone through for others and yesterday updated everybody's spelling so it matched. If you're have not yet gone in, when you do that, make sure you check your spelling against the spelling I'm using for scoring, so that you make sure you get the points allotted to you. All right, folks. With that, I am going to say have a fantastic Tuesday. I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter at HawkBlogger. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care.